right? So as I was saying, in VS Code, what you do is you connect, and you're going to use this extension called remote SSH. Again, I guess I should be a little more clear. So VS Code, normally, you're working on your local system. So you have the ability to open some folder, look at files, edit files, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, you have a terminal which connects to your system. I'm on Windows, so I also, in addition to the Windows terminal, have the ability to use Windows Subsystem for Linux. So this is a Linux terminal running on my Windows system inside VS Code. And I can do anything I would do on a Linux system inside this. If you have a Mac, you can likewise just open up a terminal from within VS Code. So if you're working like outside the context of this course, you might be working on your local system. But we generally suggest that you work on the Halligan server. The reason for that is to minimize any kind of system issues, so that weird cases happen where students, oh, it works on my machine, and then all of a sudden they submit it and it doesn't work anymore. So we want to just totally eliminate the possibility of that happening. So the easiest way to do that is to work on the Halligan server. So normally you're probably used to doing the SSH, right? So I would SSH to mrussell at vs.tufts.edu, and then that would open up a remote terminal and normally you'd be doing this in your terminal application, right? But that's not how this is going to work in this course. That's not what we usually do. Instead, what we're going to do is use something called remote SSH, which is a tool provided by Microsoft. Microsoft is responsible for this VS Code as well. So they've provided this tool, and it allows you to create a remote connection to the Halligan server, which makes life pretty easy. So again, you can follow the specific steps in those videos that are there. There's also other documentation that we've provided. You can find on the course webpage. But effectively, what you're going to do is configure this, and then once you have it installed, the basic idea is going to be you click on the lower left here, and you connect current window to host, or you could do a new one. So that the host in this case is going to be homework.cs.tufts.edu. And I previously, installed the extension remote SSH, and then where is it? And you'll notice I also have a bunch of other extensions. Like, feel free to browse the store. There's lots of cool stuff out there. I'm going to talk about one or two today, but there's lots of cool stuff you can do. Also, I've customized the sort of theme of the editor. I really like solarized, and you could get the solarized color, which is really cool. You can change your fonts and all that stuff. And there are lots of cool apps. You could feel free to play around with them. Basically, remote SSH is the only one that you really need on your local system. Okay, so notice here it says local installed, and notice here this is the remote system. So right, again, similar to Adam's packages, right? VS Code has extensions. Your extensions can work either on the local system, or you can have extensions installed in your remote. So in other words, I have a few extensions here which are only accessible in the remote system. So when I log in via remote SSH from the local system to the remote system, then I have a whole new suite of applications that I can potentially access. So you'll notice again, down here it says SSH homework, editing on SSH homework.cs.tufts.edu. You'll also notice that a terminal opened up, which is SSH to the remote system. So now I'm here in my HMRussell on homework.cs.tufts.edu. So now when I edit files and make changes, etc., I'm doing it all on the remote system. There's no sort of strange back and forth between your local environment and the remote environment. You are now working in the remote environment. And in VS Code, the command to open up a file is code. I'm going to open up a Hello World program. And so this is a new CPP file that I've just opened. And this now lives, again, on the homework server. Every change that I make after I save, I mean, obviously, if you don't save changes and you quit, nothing's been saved. But while you're working, when you save, the files will be updated on the server automatically. There's no sort of, there's much less of a kind of awkward in between. With the Atom, I think, you save and then you have to see that it goes to the remote system. There isn't that kind of sort of weird in between stuff. So it should be a lot sort of smoother in general for your standard workflow. Again, the key thing to sort of wrap your head around, which was not intuitive to me the first time I looked at this VS Code, is that you have the extensions available on the remote and the extensions on the local. So when you're developing in the remote system and you need to install extensions that you're going to be using while you're working on Halligan, those extensions need to be installed on the remote. So when you search for an extension, like let's say, yes, this will, I'm looking at the chat now, this will be recorded, and the unit testing framework I'll go into in a bit. This is actually something I built, which we're going to be using this semester. And if you're using Atom, there's actually a script on the CS server, which you can use as well. Although the extension on VS Code is pretty nifty. Basically, I've integrated it within the framework that's been provided by the VS Code folks for like unit testing stuff. So it's pretty cool. If we have time, I might show a demo of it later, but I will probably be doing other intros to that as we move along the semester. Right, so local, remote. Notice I do not have remote SSH installed on my remote system, okay? It's only on the local system, but that is used to enable this kind of connection to the remote system. And once you're in the remote, you're good to go. And so once you boot up VS Code, the first thing is to make sure that you've SSH'd. And if you have, like, sometimes there are weird things that happen where some setting is misconfigured somewhere and it'll just hang there and it won't actually connect. And reference Piazza. Basically, those questions have been asked and answered already. So you should be able to find what you need there. If you can't, just ask another question there. And the TAs are very happy. We're very happy to help you figure that out. Yeah, and then, so right, once you're here, I suggest installing client format. This is sort of something I think is really cool. Oh, before I get into that, I want to make it clear that not only are the extensions available in a local context and a remote context, but also the settings that you have are local and remote. So the settings, see, so here it says preferences, and actually you can search remote if it doesn't pop up automatically, preferences. And if it wasn't clear, I think, let's see, command palette, right? So this is what I just opened. I press Control Shift and P. I think on a Mac it's Command, and that will bring your command palette up. I don't really use this all that often, except to open up these settings files. So this settings file, you'll notice when I clicked it, it's remote settings, right? You have the same thing for your local settings too. And this can be very confusing because they're basically the same kind of thing, but one is for, again, your local environment and the other is for your remote, right? Again, clarifying, remote is the homework.cs.toughsite.edu in this case. However, I don't know, let's say you're enrolled in some course at some other university as well at the same time, you could actually have a remote connection to that institution as well. And in that case, you would also have a separate remote environment with a separate set of settings. So it's going to be a little bit different for each thing. But again, for our purposes, you probably will just have your local system and the remote. Again, we encourage working on the remote so that there are no kind of problems, and so that you can use the various, you'll be able to very easily access the starter code and things like that. And then there won't be any issues with not being sure your code is working as you expect in terms of thinking things work locally, but then somehow they break the remote system. Anyway, so these settings, you can do all kinds of things here. You can Google, VS Code settings for all kinds of stuff. You can add things like, vertical lines on the right. You can change the style of the font size and the font family. I like JetBrains Mono, by the way. Anyway, so all kinds of things you can do. And if you don't like the sort of JSON style, then you can actually open these same settings using, here we go. So see how this is the remote settings for homework.cs.tufts.edu, but it's not JSON. So you'll get something that looks like this. And if you want to change settings for any of your extensions, you can do that. So if I want to change something for the unit testing framework, there are a couple settings you can tweak if you'd like, et cetera, et cetera. I actually have found that this interface feels a little bit more clunky to me. There's kind of a lot of information at once. It's easy to not really understand where you are. And there's a lot of settings that you don't really care about. Whereas if you're editing settings directly, once you figure out what the name of the setting is and what you want to be there, then you can figure that out. Anyway, okay, so are there questions so far on basic VS Code, remote SSH, the fact that you've got local and remote extensions and you have local and remote settings? Like, understanding that, it might not be totally clear, but it will be as time goes on. But try to understand that as quickly as possible. It'll make life simpler. Any questions so far in the chat, or you can feel free to turn on your camera, etc. If not, I will just forge on ahead. So I earmarked roughly 13 minutes more for VS Code stuff. So I would love to tell you guys about Clang format. I think this is a really cool tool. I use it myself. I would suggest you use it too, but it's up to you. Essentially what it does is it automatically, when you save, if you've configured it this way, it will automatically format your document. Right, so let's say we've got some file, and then let's say, I don't know, let's say I have it like this, and I save. So after I save, it automatically formats it for me. So if I do something like, I don't know, and then, I don't know, something like that, and I save, it formats it for me. And you'll notice here, it's I've set it so that it's going to line up these declarations so that they're nice and clean. Oh, a question, sorry. Suggestion: always work remotely so we don't have to worry about making sure local and remote are set up exactly. Okay, so let me read the question, I guess, for people watching this later. So the suggestion is to always work remotely so that we aren't having to worry about making sure that local and remote are set up exactly, or should we always make sure to keep local and remote consistent? I see. I would suggest keep everything for Conf15 or CS15 on the remote server. So you don't, the reason is not necessarily it's to minimize a couple of problems. Number one, you can access your files easily in terms of not just your files, the files that are available for you for, like the homeworks and stuff. All the starter code, et cetera, is going to be on the remote system. So you're going to have to get those files off somehow. You could use SCP, but I don't know. It's just something where everything on the remote is good. Also, when you compile, you can be confident that you're using a compiler that's supported by the course, that we endorse, and there isn't any kind of, sometimes if you're using some weird settings or with, something is just a little off on your home system, there could be problems with when you think your code is working as you expect, but once you upload the code to the remote environment, all of a sudden things don't work for some reason. Again, I haven't been here when something like that happened, but Mark Sheldon, who's taught this course for many years, tells me lots of stories about how sometimes there are horror stories where students think everything's working, but something is just off, and they're the worst things to debug. So basically you can avoid all those problems. In other words, you're compiling and running your code on the remote system that our course is supporting. So that's good. Does that clear up your question, Valerie?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess you were saying, like, if you're adding an app or something, it's
Right.
There's remote and there's
Right.
local,
Right.
and so any sort of formatting is remote and local. So I guess it was more Yeah.
So whenever you're going to install an app that you want to use while you're developing, right? For this course, you want that to be just in the remote. You could have it in your local if you want to. And in fact, there are ways to like have one settings that goes everywhere with you. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I know that that's an option. But you basically just need to install it in the remote if you want to use it while you're working. So for instance, if you wanted to use Clang format while you're developing for CS15, and you're going to be using remote SSH from your local to access the remote server, once you're logged into the remote this way, then you can install Clang format on that system so that you can use it in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Again, it's a little wonky, like, but it works. It works. Yeah. So the Clang format, there are one or two weird things about actually getting it set up, and we have this info somewhere. But basically, you will want to use these settings. So the people who who established it made some odd choices, and essentially, I will actually copy and paste this in the chat, or for anyone who wants it. Okay, I guess it can't paste that. That's weird. Or you know what? I'll post it on Piazza. Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay. This. Put that on code. And I'm just going to post it without saying anything. And then I'll go back later and add some stuff. So if you wanted to use it, you could use it. So the idea here is that for Clang format to work, you have to specify a few things. And one is okay, let me step back. Clang format is a script. So it's a program which actually comes with when you build Clang, it comes with it. So again, Clang is a compiler, and Clang format is just a simple script that will, well, it's probably quite complicated, but given some text like this, it will format it based on a set of specifications that you provide. So here, we can undo that. So what are those? Oh wait, this is, yeah, good. So those settings can be all kinds of things like align consecutive declarations. So in other words, I have consecutive declarations here. It's going to line them up. So that this way it just looks clean, in my opinion. You're welcome to tweak all of these settings to your heart's content. And if you Google Clang format, you can find the manual page with all the settings on it that you can work with, and feel free to have a ball. Oh, more questions. How can we access remote settings JSON file? How do I open settings as JSON? So Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, again, after you've logged in. So if let's see, how do I close this? All right, I'm already on the host. Huh, that is weird. So anyway, when you click on the lower left, you connect the current window to host. One of these options will show up. Oh, there we go, close remote connection. So if you're here, you can't access that remote settings. Oh, maybe you can. No, you can't, right? So first thing to do is connect current window to host. And then once you're connected, you run Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on a Mac, and then you open your remote settings. And yeah, okay. So, oh, and here, if these don't show up here, just search remote settings, and then you'll see it. Okay, good, excellent. Right, so again, with Emacs. Okay, so here, all right. So we've got hello world, and right, it's auto formatting. So basically, if you install in your remote, that Clang format application, and then you copy and paste these settings in, it should just work. Fingers crossed. It took me forever to figure out all the little nitty gritty stuff because at first it just wasn't working, but I think it's really cool. It basically saves you all the hassle of having to like deal with all those little nitpicky things that graders take off points for. So I think it's good. But again, totally optional. You don't have to use it. It's just sort of one example of installing an extension and how you configure it. Yeah. So any questions so far on anything I've covered? And that's number one. Number two, did anyone actually install it? Did anyone actually get it to work? That would be really cool if they did. But if not, that's fine. And the reason I have this, by the way, Nate, Control-Shift-P and then search for settings. If you're going to remote, you have to be logged in already. So if you don't see SSH here, then that's no good. Yeah. Okay, looks like nobody has quite gotten it yet. But have you searched remote settings? Okay. Are you logged in to this homework.cs? And there's no, what if you search for preferences? Oh, is there a little caret at the beginning here? I think there has to be. Yeah. There's nothing here. If I go like that, I think that's probably the issue. Anyway, so let's keep going. So Phony, you can message me at some other point. Charlotte, I did post it on Piazza. It's my VS Code remote settings. I'll pin the post so it's at the top of the feed, and then it's kind of cryptic. It's just a dump of the settings thing. Looks like it automatically added some new lines, but you know, whatever. Okay, so other last questions, setup stuff before we jump into C++. Should we change the executable? No, actually, great question. So in the settings, there is a Clang format executable. And actually, this is kind of a long story, but looks like we have 2 minutes. So last year or 2 years ago, it was last year. Clang used to be really slow on the server. So when you do Clang++, you know, my Hello World program, for instance, see, sometimes it works, but often, yeah. So you see how long this is taking? Like this is just to compile Hello World. And the reason for this is because it's somehow, for some reason, looking through like lots and lots of system libraries to find stuff. I don't really know what's going on, and the IT staff doesn't either. So I'd had enough of it, and I really think that Clang's error messages are way better than G++. I hate G++ error messages. They confuse me and annoy me, and I have trauma associated with those. But Clang's error messages are usually much more friendly to read on the whole. So what I did was I built from source Clang on the CS in my home directory on the CS server. So if you run the use-q conf15, then this will, among other things, default your Clang++ to use the one in my home folder. So when I have and this instruction is in the lab 00, optional lab 0. You want to put this inside your CSHRC file. Again, just go to the lab, the optional lab, you'll see it. And then when it's in there, when you log in, it will automatically run this command. And this command basically runs another script, which, among other things, changes your default Clang++ to be HM Russell Clang bin Clang++. And so now if I just run Clang++, hello world, it works in about, half a second or whatever. So rather than like waiting 7 seconds to compile every single time, it goes quickly and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so when you build Clang from source, one of the things that comes along with it is Clang format. And the Clang format version that's on the server now in the default one is kind of it's an older version. And every time they release new versions, typically they will often add more options. So the newer one has more options, which is great. So basically the executable for Clang format is also in my home directory, which is kind of unusual, but whatever, it works. So that is the backstory behind that. But great question. Yeah. Okay. Oh, open Clang++. Okay, good. So I'm going to stop sharing or stop recording, and then